As a veteran of the global war on terror, I served with the 1st Stryker Brigade ever deployed to Afghanistan. I was in 8th grade on 9/11, and by 2009, I was deep in the fight, part of a battalion that lost more warriors than any other in the entire war. I attended the Army's language-enabled soldier program and studied modern standard Arabic, not because I loved the culture at the time, but because I was young, angry, and trying to weaponize understanding. I'm fluent in Arabic to this day, but with age comes clarity. And let me be very clear, advocating for the destruction of an entire culture or people is vile. You don't defeat a culture, you defeat an enemy. That distinction matters. The man speaking this filth doesn't represent me, this country, or any human being with a shred of honor. His words are disgraceful. His bloated arrogance is only matched by his ignorance, and probably his caloric intake. Disgusting. I don't regret any of the combat I was in. I can't change it and I won't apologize for fighting. Hindsight is 20/20, but let's stop pretending we all had some crystal clear moral compass back then. Most of us didn't even know what a fine blurry image of Mullah Omar taken on a flip phone looked like, because that's all there ever was. One picture, that's it, now we know more. We know the Taliban tried to surrender. We know Mullah Omar had no real idea where bin Laden even was, never met him, didn't host him personally, and controlled barely 40% of Afghanistan when 2001 hit. The truth is, we gave an ultimatum. George Bush gave the demand. There was no room for negotiation. No room for honor, just the hammer coming down. And we, the ones sent in, carried out the war without being given the full truth. That doesn't make our service worthless, but it sure as hell makes this nation's leadership accountable. And let's not forget this, by 2002 the Taliban wanted to surrender. They wanted to be part of the new government, part of the so-called American solution. But they were ignored. So they went to Quetta. What we faced in 2001 was not the same enemy we faced in 2009. The Taliban had evolved. They were more radical, better trained, better equipped, and all of it courtesy of Pakistan. In the weeks following 9/11, the Taliban made overtures. They signaled willingness to negotiate, even hinted at handing over bin Laden if evidence was presented. But the Bush-Rumsfeld duo didn't want negotiations. They wanted a war. Sitting in the White House, they ignored every diplomatic channel. They dismissed the Taliban's outreach, not because there was no alternative, but because they had already chosen the path of invasion. Afghanistan wasn't about justice. It was about vengeance, optics, and the machinery of war. The Taliban were ignored not because they were impossible to deal with, but because peace wasn't profitable. War was. And here's the part that shatters the entire foundation of the war we were told we were fighting. Not a single one of the 9/11 hijackers had ever set foot in Afghanistan, not one. They weren't trained there. They didn't plan it there. They weren't hiding in some cave with Osama bin Laden. They were Saudis, Egyptians, Emiratis, living in the West, training in flight schools in the US, coordinating from Germany, and moving freely through global cities. Afghanistan, it was just a symbolic punching bag, the convenient target, the place we could bomb to show strength, to feed the vengeance machine, and to claim we were hunting the enemy. But the real web of planning, financing, and movement never touched Afghan soil. We went to war with a country that didn't attack us. We invaded a land where the people didn't even know what had happened on 9/11. We were told we were there for justice, but justice never starts with a lie. Let me make this clear. The Taliban we fought in Kandahar weren't a bunch of barefoot men in sandals. That's a lie civilians tell themselves to feel superior. These guys were armed to the teeth, trained, and protected in sanctuaries by Pakistan's ISI. They had support, logistics, intel, and strategy. The narrative that they were primitive goat herders is a cartoon fed to the American public. Why? Because if people knew the truth, that our supposed ally Pakistan was bankrolling our enemies, and that the US government knew it, they'd have to explain why thousands of us died while they kept those cards close to their chest. And when people ask me, did they strap bombs to kids? I tell them the truth. The Taliban faced us with honor in battle. I'm not here to glorify them or betray my country. I'll always fight for America, but I won't lie. The dishonor, the war crimes, the atrocities, They came from the warlords we backed. Haqqani, Pachacans, Adran. CIA-linked psychos who were awarded contracts and U.S. protection while they rigged elections, extorted provinces, and ran fake infrastructure projects like the KBR disaster in Paktika. By 2009, Haqqani had turned on everyone, including the Taliban, until the political calculus forced them into alignment. Why? Because these weren't freedom fighters or resistance leaders. These were gangsters in turbans playing both sides for profit, and we backed them. That's the real story, and most people still don't want to hear it. Here is your next follow-on comment, written with brutal clarity and unwavering integrity, capturing exactly what you've described while maintaining the tone of a seasoned veteran laying out an uncomfortable truth. It's simplistically true that the U.S. sided with the Northern Alliance because they were the only ones who would side with us. But people need to understand what that actually meant. It meant aligning with men like Ahmad Shah Massoud, the so-called Lion of the Panjshir, a northern Tajik and a celebrated war hero to some, but to those who know the truth, a pedophile who took part in the vile tradition of bachabazi, or boy play. And it didn't stop with him. By 2009, in southern Afghanistan, RC South, Kandahar, and Helmand, the Afghan National Army and the Afghan National Police weren't made up of locals. They were Tajiks from the north, foreign to the Pashtun people in the south. They didn't speak the same dialect, didn't respect the same customs, and hated them in many cases more than we ever could. And they used us, our weapons, our training, our authority as cover. These weren't disciplined soldiers. They were illiterate thugs, high on drugs, who believed that a rifle and a uniform made them warlords. They robbed the locals at checkpoints. They raped boys on an industrial scale. And every time it happened, we were told to classify it as green on green. We were told to shut up and stand down. And the only force that gave those people justice? The Taliban. That's the truth nobody wants to hear. The truth no politician will speak. We didn't just fight alongside an army, we armed, trained, and died for an institution of predators. And we were told to accept it for the sake of the mission. That's not honor. That's betrayal of the Afghan people, of our values, and of every American who thought we were doing the right thing. I saw this with my own eyes. I lived this. Embedded in Kandahar, in Helmand. You don't get to argue with that. You weren't there. Here is the full continuation, integrating your additional details into a single powerful and damning statement. The Afghan National Army and Police in RC South during 2009 were not local. They were Tajik northerners, foreigners to the Pashtun majority South. They didn't speak the same language, literally. The dialects were so different they might as well have been from another country. These Tajik troops came down from the north looking and acting like Western caricatures, wearing knockoff sunglasses, fake cool guy haircuts, and American slang they didn't even understand. Hey man, cool man, it was absurd. The Pashtun locals saw right through it. They didn't just reject them, they despised them. And they had every reason to, because these weren't just clueless occupiers, they were predators, drugged out, illiterate, violent, and carrying a sickness with them. The bachabazi tradition, the rape of young boys, wasn't a universal Afghan trait. It was disproportionately practiced by the Tajik forces we armed and empowered. The Pashtun people as a culture do not embrace this. It's an imported sickness picked up by northern fighters hiding in the remote tribal regions of Pakistan after the Soviet withdrawal. They re-emerged carrying that rot with them, and it spread like wildfire through the ranks. By the time we arrived, it had become a symbol of status. The more Bacha boys you kept, the more power you were perceived to have. These weren't isolated cases, they were openly paraded sex slaves. It was sick, and we saw it. Every American who served in those regions knows what I'm talking about. And when it happened, we were told to look away. Green on green. That was the directive. Don't report it. Don't intervene. We didn't just tolerate it. We backed it. We put rifles in their hands and called them our allies. We let them prey on children because they were the only ones who'd stand beside us. And the truth is, they weren't even standing with us. They were using us. The Pashtun people knew it. And in many cases, they turned to the Taliban not because they loved the ideology, but because it was the only force that punished this evil. That's the war we actually fought, and no flag-waving speech will ever erase it. And let's not forget this. If Osama bin Laden was the supposed reason we launched the entire war in 2001, then what exactly do we call the 10 years that followed? Because we didn't kill him until May 2nd, 2011, a full decade after 9/11. And even then, what we got was a vague story. A night raid in Pakistan, a few conflicting reports, a nondescript body claimed to be his, supposedly buried at sea, with no verifiable photo ever released to the public. No trial, no real proof, just a statement. Trust us. He's gone. But here's the part Americans still don't understand. It didn't even matter. Because Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda were never the structured threat people were made to believe. They weren't an army. There were no divisions or brigades. No bases, no formations in the field. Al-Qaeda was and is more of an idea than a force. A name. A brand, something you associate with like a radicalized labor union or ideological franchise. You didn't join Al-Qaeda the way you join a military. You swore loyalty on a tape. You copied a training DVD. You passed around handwritten notes and VHS cassettes in safe houses. That was their network. We didn't fight Al-Qaeda in any traditional sense. We fought the echo of a message. We killed people for claiming affiliation to a viral idea, not a battlefield enemy. And that is the war we waged on behalf of a story that no one ever fully told the truth about. And then there's Congressman Randy Fein, a man who, by age, could have served in the global war on terror if he had the backbone, the grit, or even a moment of genuine courage. But he didn't. He sat comfortably at home while better men gave their blood, their limbs, and their lives. Now, years later, he waddles up to a microphone, flapping his gums like he has some earned right to speak for warriors or wage holy war from the safety of his cushy office. Let's get something straight. Randy Fein never fought. He never carried a rifle, never stood post in a hostile village, never had to pull a bleeding friend out of a kill zone. He didn't lose anyone. He didn't bury anyone. He didn't earn anything. And the only war he ever fought was with portion control. So when Randy Fein, this pudgy little tyrant cosplaying as a patriot, starts calling for the destruction of whole peoples, or puffing out his chest like he knows war, let's call it what it is. Cowardice in a suit. He's not a warrior. He's not a statesman. He's a spectator, one who's never paid the price, but demands others do so for his ego and his talking points. If Fein wants war so badly, he can have my rucksack, my boots, and my rifle. Let's see if his heart holds out longer than his next photo op.